James Livingstone eased his electric car to a smooth stop at the private airport, the silent hum of the vehicle fading into the soft rustle of morning air. The place was familiar yet somehow exhilarating, a pristine stretch of runway surrounded by sleek aircraft, each a symbol of a life few dared to dream. Here, in this quiet corner of exclusivity, James felt a powerful mix of pride and anticipation bubbling within him. This was no ordinary flight, it was a stepping stone toward a new chapter for his company. James stepped out of his car, the polished leather of his shoes clicking against the tarmac. He straightened his navy suit, feeling the reassuring weight of his tailored jacket and glancing at the private jet that gleamed under the morning sun. The chrome of his plane mirrored his own reflection, bold yet refined, a testament to years of hard work and resilience. The company logo, elegantly displayed on the fuselage, stood as a silent reminder of how far he had come, a symbol of success built on grit, skill, and strategy. But as he walked toward his jet, a familiar chill ran down his spine, a quiet sense of tension that James knew too well. At the edge of the runway, a small group of ground crew members stood, whispering among themselves. Their eyes flickered in his direction, expressions blank yet filled with that faint flicker he had seen many times before, a whisper of doubt, a shadow of suspicion. He kept his stride steady, his gaze fixed ahead, but his mind was already bracing itself. He had faced this kind of scrutiny all his life, and despite the luxury of his car, his tailored suit, and the jet he owned, some people still saw him as an outsider. Today, as he stepped into this rarefied world he had worked so hard to inhabit, the looks reminded him just how persistent those barriers could be. "Good morning," he said, nodding politely to the technicians as he neared the jet. They returned his greeting, but their eyes flickered away, guarded and uncertain. He noticed one of them, a stocky man with a furrowed brow, watching him a bit too closely, as though waiting for James to reveal some hidden flaw. James's gaze drifted to the terminal behind them, simple yet modern, its glass windows reflecting the first light of dawn. Inside, a few employees lingered, glancing his way with that same intensity. He took a breath, steadying himself. He wasn't here to dwell on the skepticism of others, he was here for a purpose. And nothing would shake his focus today. Reaching the base of the plane, he paused, taking in the view. This jet was more than a tool of convenience, it was a hard-won symbol of his freedom, a testament to his resilience. He glanced at his watch, checking the time before climbing the stairs to the cockpit. Today was the day he would seal a major business deal, a deal that could push his company to new heights, beyond borders, into the international market. The meeting was on his mind as he began his pre-flight routine, inspecting the wings, checking the fuel levels, verifying every detail with practiced ease. Yet, just as he settled into the rhythm of his work, a voice called out from behind him. "Excuse me, sir." James turned to see the stocky ground crew member approaching, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. The man's gaze roamed over James, lingering a moment too long on his dark skin before settling back on his face. "Are you the pilot of this aircraft?" The question hung in the air, loaded and weighty, like a stone thrown into still water. James raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the doubt in the man's tone. "Yes," he replied calmly, his voice even. "I'm the owner and the pilot." A flicker of disbelief crossed the man's face, quickly masked by a forced neutrality. "I see," he muttered, before clearing his throat. Just need to run a few checks on everything. Standard procedure." James's jaw tightened, though he kept his expression polite. Standard procedure. He had been through these so-called procedures more times than he could count, and he knew they were anything but standard. But he nodded, handing over his credentials with a calm born of long practice. As the man walked away, papers in hand, James turned back to the jet, steeling himself for what he could already sense was coming. His phone buzzed, a reminder for his meeting, and he dismissed it quickly. Today was too important to let these subtle insults sway him. He had a job to do, and he would do it, on his terms. But as he took one last look around the airport, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. James moved with quiet confidence, his hands deftly checking every detail of his jet. He knew each panel, each switch, each angle of the aircraft he had flown so many times before. Flying had become his sanctuary, a place where he could leave the world's assumptions behind and chart his own course in the open skies. But today, that sanctuary felt miles away. He was halfway through his pre-flight inspection when he caught sight of the stocky ground crew member again, returning from the control tower with two others in tow. Their steps were brisk, their expressions tight, as though bracing themselves for some inevitable confrontation. James felt his muscles tense, though he kept his expression impassive. He had faced these situations before, but today, there was something more unsettling about their approach. One of the newcomers, a tall, balding man with an air of forced authority, stepped forward, holding James's documents in one hand. He examined them as if they were written in a foreign language, his gaze occasionally darting up to meet James's steady eyes, then flickering away. "Uncomfortable. Mr. Livingstone," he began, his voice laced with a forced politeness. There's been a report about some suspicious activity here. He paused, waiting for a reaction that James didn't give. We'll need to verify everything, your credentials, the registration of the plane, the whole lot. Standard protocol. You understand. Suspicious activity? James repeated, keeping his tone measured. I've provided all the necessary documentation. And I've been through this airport's checks many times before. There's no reason for additional verification. The tall man shifted uncomfortably, a slight flush creeping up his neck. We're just following orders. There's been, well, an increase in fraudulent cases involving private jets. So we can't be too careful. James kept his gaze steady, reading between the lines. The increase in fraud was only a convenient excuse, a cover for the mistrust plain in their faces. He had seen it before, those looks that questioned his right to belong in this world, despite everything he'd achieved. Fine, he replied, extending a calm hand. I'll comply. But please, let's not pretend this is about routine checks. A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face, but he quickly recovered, nodding curtly. Of course, sir. We appreciate your cooperation. James watched as they huddled with his paperwork, their whispers barely audible over the hum of the distant runway. He could sense the quick glances thrown his way, the undercurrent of doubt that clung to their actions like a shadow. Taking a steadying breath, he looked away, focusing on the skyline as it brightened with the first hints of sunrise. He had learned long ago that there were moments to fight and moments to wait, to bide his time until he could act on his own terms. A movement at the edge of the runway caught his eye. A security vehicle was approaching, its flashing lights a stark contrast against the pale morning light. James's pulse quickened, frustration sparking within him. It was clear now that this was no ordinary inspection. They were looking for something, anything, that could justify their suspicions. The car came to a halt, and two officers emerged, their hands resting on their belts as they sized up James from a distance. One of them, a younger officer with a barely concealed smirk, approached him with a swagger that bordered on arrogant. Good morning, the officer said. His tone clipped. I'm Officer Crane. We've received a report, and we'll need to see some identification. There have been reports of suspicious behavior here. James met his gaze evenly, his voice calm but firm. I've already provided all my documentation to the ground crew, he replied, nodding toward the tall man clutching his papers. I'm the owner of this aircraft and the pilot. I'm preparing for a business flight. The officer gave a dismissive nod, his smirk widening. Owner and pilot? That's quite a luxury, he muttered, his words carrying a hint of disbelief. Mind if we check the plane ourselves? Just to be thorough? James's jaw tightened. I do mind. Actually, this is private property, and unless you have a warrant, I won't consent to a search. A flicker of annoyance flashed across the officer's face, and for a moment, James saw the calculation in his eyes, the subtle shift from suspicion to something sharper, more confrontational. Well, we'll need to verify everything, sir, the officer replied, stressing the last word with a tone that felt like a slap. Can't be too careful these days. Frauds everywhere. You know? James felt his anger simmering just below the surface. But he held his ground, his expression resolute. I understand you have a job to do, officer. But I've already complied with all necessary procedures. My business and my flight are legitimate, and I'd appreciate being treated accordingly. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, his smirk fading into something colder. Let's just keep it civil here, Mr. Livingstone. We're only following protocol. James didn't respond, watching them as they conferred quietly, the weight of their scrutiny heavy on his shoulders. He knew better than to give them any reason to escalate further, even if every fiber of his being wanted to demand the respect he had more than earned. Finally, the officer glanced up, his expression hardening. Until we're done verifying everything, I'm afraid you're not going anywhere. James's heart sank, a cold realization settling over him. This wasn't going to end quickly or quietly. He could see the judgment in their eyes, the same disbelief that seemed to question his every right to stand here as an equal. This wasn't just about his jet, his credentials, or even his success. It was about the unspoken rules he had broken by daring to succeed on his terms. Keeping his voice steady, he took out his phone and dialed his lawyer, Rebecca. He listened to the ringing tone, his gaze never leaving the officers as they continued their investigation with smug certainty. He didn't have to say it to know that she'd understand the gravity of his call. In his mind, the calm determination he had held onto so tightly was slowly giving way to a familiar resolve. This was a fight he hadn't wanted, but if they insisted on questioning his legitimacy, then he would give them an answer they couldn't ignore. The tarmac felt colder than usual, as though the morning had shifted subtly from anticipation to hostility. James leaned against the side of his jet, his phone pressed to his ear, waiting for his lawyer, Rebecca Sterling, to pick up. Each ring felt like a countdown, a reminder of how quickly his morning had spiraled out of control. Finally, her familiar, steady voice came through. James? What's going on? Rebecca, he began, keeping his voice low. I'm being held up at the airport. They're questioning the legitimacy of my ownership of the plane, even though I've given them every piece of documentation they've asked for." There was a pause, and he could almost picture her eyes narrowing in quiet anger. "Have they searched the plane?" "No. I refused without a warrant. But they're acting as if that's all the reason they need to keep me here. They're escalating things." "Stay calm. I'm on my way," she said, her voice brisk and determined. "They don't have a right to detain you without probable cause. I'll be there soon. Just keep things steady until I arrive." James hung up and slipped the phone back into his pocket. But as he did, his gaze landed on the police officers still lingering at the edge of the runway. One of them, a younger officer with a barely concealed sneer, seemed almost too comfortable, lounging beside his patrol car with a smug confidence that set James's teeth on edge. The older officer, a solid, imposing figure with mirrored sunglasses and a permanent scowl, approached James with slow, deliberate steps. "Mr. Livingstone," he said, his tone dripping with suspicion, "while we wait for verification, I'll need you to step back from the aircraft and refrain from entering it." James raised an eyebrow. "I've complied with every protocol. This is my plane. I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary." The officer's mouth twisted into a tight smile, one that held no warmth. "Let's not make this difficult," he replied, ignoring James's reasoning. "Just step back, and we'll be done when we're done." James clenched his jaw but stepped away, his hands loose at his sides to show he posed no threat. Inside, he could feel a steady simmer of anger rising, a frustration born from years of navigating these subtle, unspoken barriers. He had built this life piece by piece, only to find that, in moments like this, his accomplishments were invisible to those who saw only his skin. "Where exactly are you headed, Mr. Livingstone?" the younger officer chimed in, his tone thick with disbelief. "New York," James replied, voice tight but even. "I have a business meeting." The young officer raised an eyebrow, giving him a dismissive look. "Must be nice," he muttered, low enough that only James could hear, yet loud enough to land with a sting. James bit his tongue. He knew better than to take the bait. Any reaction would just be fuel for them, an excuse to twist the narrative in their favor. He had seen this game before, the casual, almost lazy displays of power, the taunts designed to elicit anger. But he had learned long ago that dignity was his strongest armor. The older officer looked down at James's documents again, flipping through them as if searching for some hidden flaw, some reason to drag this out further. His fingers tapped against his radio, and James watched as he spoke into it, calling in an ID check with a pointed glance in James's direction. "Make sure this guy's record is clean. We don't want any surprises," he said, his words punctuated with a quiet snicker. James felt a chill run down his spine, a familiar mix of fear and defiance, as he watched the officers exchange smug glances. His mind flashed to the countless times he'd encountered similar treatment, the subtle and not so subtle ways people questioned his success, doubted his right to exist in spaces he had rightfully earned. But this time, it felt more intense, like a calculated ambush rather than a momentary slight. Just as he was about to turn away, the older officer spoke again, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Actually, Mr. Livingstone," he said, "we'll need you to step completely away from the aircraft. You're not allowed near it until we finish our inspection." James raised his hand slightly in mock surrender, though his face remained calm. "Fine. But for the record, I'm only complying under duress. I've done nothing to warrant this treatment." The officer's smirk deepened, his gaze never wavering from James. "Noted. But you'll stay where we can see you." James stepped back, every movement controlled, the anger in his veins pulsing like a slow burn. He felt the weight of their judgment, the collective assumption that he didn't belong here, that his very presence was a threat. It was a bitter irony. He had done everything right, played by every rule, built his business from the ground up, and yet here he was, being treated like an imposter in his own world. The officers began inspecting the plane, their hands running over the sleek surfaces, checking and rechecking details, as though they expected to find evidence of a crime hidden in the polished metal. A crowd of airport employees gathered at a distance, whispering and casting quick glances at James, their faces painted with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled suspicion. "Mr. Livingstone," the younger officer called out again, his tone dripping with false courtesy. "Why didn't you just hire a pilot? Seems a little unusual, don't you think?" James kept his gaze steady, his voice calm. "I am the pilot, officer. I earned my license years ago, and I prefer to fly myself. There's nothing unusual about that." The officer laughed, a short, derisive sound that made James's hands tighten into fists at his sides. "Right, just making sure everything's as you say." James turned his head slightly, catching the eye of the airport manager standing nearby. For a fleeting moment, he thought he might see a spark of support, some acknowledgement that this treatment was beyond reason. But instead, the man quickly looked away, his expression unreadable, his loyalty firmly on the side of authority. It was in that moment, watching the manager's silent complicity, that James realized just how alone he was in this. The familiar weight of frustration and isolation pressed down on him. But he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper would only hand them exactly what they wanted, a reason to escalate, to validate their suspicions. Instead, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and focused on Rebecca's words. She was on her way, and once she arrived, this nightmare would have to end. Until then, he would endure it. He had survived worse, and he would survive this, too. As he opened his eyes, he saw a flash of headlights in the distance, cutting through the early morning haze. Relief washed over him as he recognized the sleek black car pulling up to the edge of the tarmac. Rebecca was here. And with her arrival came a sense of hope that perhaps, today, he would not have to fight this battle alone. Rebecca Sterling's car came to a stop, and James watched as she stepped out with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the tarmac. Dressed in a tailored black suit and carrying a leather briefcase, she radiated confidence, her gaze sharp and unyielding as it swept over the officers gathered around James's jet. She wasted no time, walking straight up to the group, her eyes narrowing at the officers who had dared to interfere with her client. "Good morning, officers," she greeted, her voice cutting through the morning air with a controlled, commanding edge. "I'm Rebecca Sterling, legal counsel for Mr. Livingstone." She flashed her credentials with a swift, practiced motion, her expression daring anyone to challenge her authority. The older officer shifted, his posture stiffening, but he quickly masked his discomfort. "Ms. Sterling, we're conducting an investigation into suspicious activity," he said, his voice dripping with official tone. "Mr. Livingstone's documentation is under review, and we're simply verifying that everything checks out." Rebecca's eyebrow arched slightly, unimpressed. "And yet, my client has provided you with every legal document required. I'd like to know exactly why he is still being detained here." The officer's jaw clenched, his gaze flickering between Rebecca and James. "This is just standard procedure, ma'am. Given the nature of fraud these days, we can't afford to be careless." Rebecca's expression hardened, her gaze piercing. "Careless," she repeated, her voice laced with disdain. "Mr. Livingstone is the registered owner of this plane, as all of your verifications have already shown. And yet here we are, wasting time while my client is unlawfully detained." The younger officer, the one with the smirk that had been taunting James all morning, stepped forward, crossing his arms. "Look, we're just being thorough," he said, his tone brimming with smugness. "After all, you can't trust everything on paper these days." Rebecca's gaze turned icy as she locked eyes with him. "Thoroughness is one thing," she replied calmly, her words cutting through his bravado like a blade. "But this is far from thorough, it's harassment. And unless you want this to become a formal complaint, I suggest you wrap up your verification and let my client proceed with his day." The older officer's posture wavered, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his face. "We're just following protocol," he muttered. But the confidence in his voice was beginning to fade under Rebecca's unrelenting stare. "Your protocol has crossed the line," Rebecca shot back. "And I'm sure your superiors would agree that detaining a law-abiding citizen without probable cause will not go unnoticed. I'm giving you one last chance to release my client before we escalate this." The two officers exchanged glances, their previous smugness replaced with the dawning realization that they had overstepped. But the younger officer, unwilling to let go of his assumed power, gave a cold smile. "We're still running checks. He's not going anywhere until we've verified everything." Rebecca's gaze grew steely, her jaw set in resolve. "Fine," she said, her voice low and laced with menace. "Then I'll be making a call to a judge, right now, to have this situation resolved legally. And let me be clear, when I'm done, this incident will be part of a formal civil rights case against both the police department and the airport administration." The officers visibly tensed, their postures stiffening as the reality of her threat settled over them. The older officer took a step back, glancing nervously between James and Rebecca. "There's no need to involve the courts," he mumbled, his tone shifting from authority to uncertainty. "If everything checks out, we'll let him go." Rebecca's eyes didn't waver, her gaze fixed on him like a hawk. "Then I suggest you get to it, because every second you keep him here is another that you'll have to account for in court." The tension was thick, each side locked in a silent battle of wills. James stood quietly, feeling a surge of respect and gratitude for Rebecca's unyielding support. For the first time that morning, he felt the heavy weight on his shoulders begin to lift, replaced by a spark of hope. After what felt like an eternity, the older officer finally gave a reluctant nod. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back. "He's free to go. For now. But we'll be keeping an eye on this situation." Rebecca's expression was cold, unrelenting. "You do that," she replied, her voice dripping with restrained fury. She turned to James, her gaze softening just slightly. "Let's get out of here." As they walked toward the plane, James caught sight of the officers huddled together by their patrol cars, whispering amongst themselves, casting quick glances in his direction. He knew that the struggle wasn't over, that their departure was merely the first step in a longer battle for accountability. "Thank you," Rebecca, he said quietly as they reached the jet. I couldn't have faced that alone. She offered him a reassuring nod. That's what I'm here for. But I want you to know, James, this isn't over. We're filing a formal complaint. This isn't just about today, it's about making sure this doesn't happen to you or anyone else again. James looked at her, his resolve hardening. Agreed. Let's make sure they're held accountable. Rebecca gave him a firm nod, her gaze steady. Consider it done. As James climbed into the cockpit and settled into the pilot's seat, he felt a sense of purpose flooding through him. The morning had been marred by doubt, fear, and anger. But as he looked out at the runway stretching before him, he felt something else rising within, a determination to see this through. To make a stand not only for himself but for everyone who had ever been doubted, questioned, or marginalized. As he powered up the jet, he caught a glimpse of the officers by their cars, watching as he prepared for takeoff. He gave them a steady look, one filled with quiet defiance. A promise that he would not be silenced. With a final nod to Rebecca, who stood on the tarmac watching him, James guided the jet onto the runway. The engine roared to life, and as he lifted off, leaving the airport and its tensions behind, he knew that this was only the beginning of the battle ahead. But he was ready. High above the city, soaring into open skies, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. And this time, he would make sure his voice was heard. The city skyline stretched before James as he navigated his plane through the crisp, open skies. He felt a strange mix of freedom and exhaustion. The scene at the airport lingered in his mind, each confrontational word and suspicious glance replaying like an unwanted memory. Yet, as he approached his destination, he felt a steady resolve harden within him. This wasn't going to end quietly. Not this time. Once he landed in New York, James quickly checked his phone, where a series of missed calls and text notifications awaited him. As expected, Rebecca had already taken action. There was a message from her marked urgent, "Call me as soon as you land. We're going public with this." Taking a steadying breath, James dialed her number. "James." Rebecca's voice came through, sharp and energized. "How was the flight?" "Smooth enough." "What's going on?" he asked, leaning back in his seat as he absorbed the weight of the day. "I've spoken with several media outlets," she replied. "This story is too important to keep quiet. We're making a formal complaint against the police department and the airport administration. And I've already had a few reporters reach out for your statement." James felt a surge of mixed emotions, relief, anticipation, but also a hint of dread. Going public would mean scrutiny, his life exposed to the world's opinion. But he knew it was necessary. "So, we're really doing this?" "We have to," Rebecca said firmly. "This isn't just about you, James. It's about anyone who's ever been treated as less than. No matter their accomplishments or rights. Your story could be a catalyst for change." He took a deep breath, nodding to himself. "All right, let's do it. Where do we start?" Rebecca's voice softened. "We start by telling the truth. I've arranged for an interview with a journalist who's covered cases like this before. They'll help get your story out, and the public will hear exactly what happened." That evening, James sat across from a seasoned journalist in a quiet New York studio, the soft glow of the camera lights casting shadows around them. The journalist, a woman named Clara Hughes, had a calm but probing demeanor. Her eyes held a quiet empathy that put James slightly at ease. But he could still feel the weight of the questions to come. "Mr. Livingstone," Clara began, her voice smooth but direct, "can you walk us through what happened at the airport?" James took a deep breath, glancing briefly at Rebecca, who gave him a steady, reassuring nod. Turning back to Clara, he began to recount the morning, starting from his arrival at the private airport, the glances from the ground crew, the unnecessary delays, and finally, the officer's aggressive questioning and refusal to respect his rights. "It wasn't just suspicion," James said, his voice quiet but filled with the weight of conviction. "It was the assumption that I didn't belong there. That someone like me, a black man, couldn't possibly own a plane or be there for legitimate business. And I'm no stranger to prejudice. But this was different. It felt intentional." Clara listened intently, her expression grave. "And when you refused to let them search the plane without a warrant? They escalated. It was clear that they were looking for a reason to detain me. A way to turn this into something it wasn't. Even with my lawyer present. They kept pushing. I was treated as a suspect. Not as a business owner or a licensed pilot with a legitimate flight plan." The interview lasted nearly an hour, each question probing deeper into the experience, each answer building a picture of the quiet humiliation and strength that James had endured. By the time they finished, he felt drained. But he also felt a sense of relief, like a weight he had carried silently had finally been set down. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, James's phone buzzed nonstop with notifications as his story hit the headlines. News outlets carried the story under titles that demanded attention: racial profiling at the airport, businessman detained despite providing proof of ownership, and injustice at high altitude, black pilot faces prejudice over private jet. Public outrage was immediate and intense. Social media erupted in support, with thousands of people sharing the story and calling for accountability. Hashtags demanding justice trended across platforms, and comments flooded in from people who shared similar experiences of prejudice and discrimination. Messages of support poured in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Some were from others in the aviation industry who had faced similar suspicions. Others from people who simply wanted to stand in solidarity. James read each one, feeling a powerful mix of validation and sadness. So many people had endured the same quiet humiliation he had. His story was just one among countless others. Yet now it had become a beacon of hope for those who were tired of staying silent. That afternoon, Rebecca called him, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. The police department and airport administration have released statements. What did they say? James asked, already expecting the usual deflections. They're calling it a misunderstanding, she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. They've promised to review protocols to ensure it doesn't happen again. James felt a familiar frustration tighten in his chest. A misunderstanding, he repeated, his voice laced with bitterness. That's what they're calling it? They're hoping it'll be enough to pacify the public. But I've already filed a civil rights lawsuit. This isn't going to end with a review. They need to be held accountable. And we're not stopping until there's real change. James nodded, a spark of determination rekindling in him. Thank you, Rebecca. This isn't just for me. It's for everyone else who's ever faced this. Over the next few days, the story continued to gain traction, and the pressure mounted on the police department and airport administration. Public figures spoke out, and civil rights organizations released statements in support of James's fight for justice. Rebecca's lawsuit brought additional scrutiny, exposing long-standing issues of racial profiling and abuse of power within law enforcement and airport security. But for James, the victory wasn't just about legal action or media attention. It was about a broader, deeper change, about using his voice to challenge a system that had tried to silence him. And as he watched the movement grow, he realized that his story had become part of something bigger than himself. Late one night, as he sat alone in his office, James thought back to that moment on the tarmac when he had felt so isolated, so vulnerable. He hadn't known then how far-reaching the impact of that moment would be, hadn't realized how many others would stand with him. But now, as he looked out over the city lights, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The fight was just beginning, but he was ready, and he wasn't fighting alone. The days following James's interview were a whirlwind of statements, updates, and media inquiries. Every headline and social media post reinforced the urgency of his fight, but they also reminded him of how deeply rooted the problem was. The system had attempted to brush off his experience as a mere misunderstanding, yet he knew, and so did Rebecca, that it was anything but. In the middle of one particularly chaotic afternoon, Rebecca called him into her office. When James arrived, she was already deep in conversation with another attorney from her firm. Papers spread out across her desk like a battlefield map. She glanced up as he entered, giving him a nod and gesturing to a chair. James, we're moving forward with the civil rights case, she said, her voice calm but energized. The airport administration and police department are under serious pressure to address their practices. We're pushing for more than an apology, we're demanding institutional reforms. James felt a surge of determination, the words affirming his purpose in this fight. What kind of reforms? He asked, leaning forward, eager to know just how far-reaching their impact could be. Rebecca glanced at the papers on her desk, her fingers tracing over a printed document. We're proposing a complete overhaul of the airport's training protocols. Every member of the airport staff and every law enforcement officer will undergo mandatory anti-discrimination and racial sensitivity training. No one should face what you faced simply because of their appearance. Her words hung in the air, and James felt a sense of satisfaction settle within him. He had fought hard to reach this point, and now he was finally seeing the beginning of change. And that's not all. Rebecca continued, her gaze steely. We're also demanding an official apology and public acknowledgement of misconduct from the police department. Those officers didn't just make a mistake, they acted with prejudice. This case will set a precedent to hold people accountable, whether they're wearing a uniform or not. James let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of those words. An official apology might seem small in comparison to the emotional turmoil he had endured, but he knew the significance. It would be an admission of guilt, a break in the armor of institutional denial. What are the chances they agree to this? He asked. His voice low but steady. Rebecca's mouth curved into a determined smile. They're going to have no choice. The public outcry has been relentless. And if they refuse, they'll face a legal battle that could end in more than just policy changes. This case could set a national standard for how racial profiling cases are handled in aviation and beyond. James felt a surge of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. This wasn't just about him, it was about dismantling a system that had ignored the harm it inflicted on countless others. As they continued strategizing, Rebecca's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen before answering. Yes? Good. Send them in. She hung up, looking at James with a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. We have representatives from the airport administration and police department coming in for a meeting. They're here to negotiate. Which means we're making them nervous. James's heart pounded. The people who had once dismissed him as an outsider were now walking into Rebecca's office, ready to answer for their actions. He straightened in his seat, every part of him prepared for what was to come. Underscore 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 underscore. A few minutes later, two representatives entered, accompanied by their attorneys. Their expressions were tense, their movements controlled, as though carefully calculating each step. The older man, a senior officer from the police department, held himself stiffly, while the woman from the airport administration wore a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. Rebecca wasted no time. Thank you for meeting with us, she began, her tone firm. Let's get right to it. Mr. Livingstone has endured an incident that demands accountability, and the current response from your departments has been inadequate. The senior officer's jaw tightened. We've already issued a statement, and the officers involved have been placed on administrative leave. Rebecca's gaze sharpened. Administrative leave is not accountability, she replied coldly. This isn't about shuffling people to save face. It's about systemic reform. James watched the two representatives exchange uneasy glances. He could see the cracks in their confidence. The dawning realization that this meeting wasn't going to be a simple formality. We're open to discussing reforms, the woman from the airport administration interjected, her voice wavering slightly. We understand that this situation could have been handled differently, and we're prepared to review our training protocols. Reviewing isn't enough, Rebecca countered. We're talking about implementing a comprehensive program that includes mandatory anti-discrimination training for all airport and law enforcement personnel. This training will cover recognizing unconscious bias, handling diverse populations, and ensuring respectful treatment for all passengers. The representatives looked at each other, caught in the weight of Rebecca's demands. They hadn't come expecting a negotiation of this scale, but James could tell they were beginning to see the futility of resisting. Let's say we agree to this training program, the officer said slowly, his voice laced with reluctance. What else are you asking for? Rebecca met his gaze without flinching. A public apology. An acknowledgement that Mr. Livingstone's treatment was based on racial bias. You will make it clear that what happened to him is not acceptable, and you will take every measure to ensure it doesn't happen again. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his expression hardening. We can't just issue an apology without an internal review. Then do the review, Rebecca replied smoothly. But make it thorough. Mr. Livingstone's experience has drawn national attention, and people are watching closely. This is your opportunity to show that you're committed to genuine change. A tense silence filled the room as the representatives deliberated, exchanging murmured words with their attorneys. James watched, his pulse steady but unyielding. He knew this was a pivotal moment, one that could lead to lasting reform if they could hold their ground. After a lengthy pause, the woman from the airport administration cleared her throat. We'll agree to the training program, she said slowly, and we'll recommend an internal review of this incident. As for the public apology, she trailed off, glancing at the senior officer. The officer's face remained tight, but he nodded reluctantly. We'll issue an apology. This is a unique situation, and we want to do what's right for the public. Rebecca's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Good, she said, her voice steady. We'll follow up on these agreements to ensure they're implemented properly. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with both sides finalizing the terms of the agreement. James felt a wave of relief as he watched the representatives leave, their expressions visibly subdued. They had come with the intention of downplaying the incident, but they were leaving with a commitment to real change. Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, James met with Rebecca in her office to discuss next steps. She leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile on her face. Today was a victory. James, we're setting a precedent. And it's going to have a ripple effect. Other airports, other police departments, they'll see what happened here. And they'll know they can't ignore these issues any longer. James felt a quiet pride settle within him. The weight of his experience transformed into something powerful. Thank you, Rebecca, he said. His voice filled with gratitude. You believed in this fight from the beginning. Rebecca shrugged. But her smile softened. I knew it was worth it. And I knew you wouldn't back down. James left her office feeling lighter than he had in days. A sense of accomplishment filling him as he walked out into the cool night. As he looked up at the stars, he thought about the journey that had led him here, the prejudice he had faced, the obstacles he had overcome. This victory wasn't just for him, it was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. For everyone who had endured injustice without the power to fight back. This was more than a win, it was a message. And as James walked into the night, he knew that message would continue to resonate, pushing for a future where everyone could rise without being held back by ignorance and prejudice. The days after the agreement were a whirlwind of media coverage, meetings, and planning sessions. James's story had become a national headline, and the airport's promised reforms were being closely watched by the public. The weight of his journey was no longer just his own, it had become a beacon for others. And yet, amid the media frenzy and public support, James's own business was still at the forefront of his mind. As he prepared for a pivotal meeting with his business partners, Evan Richards and Sarah Mitchell, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His company had come a long way, but the recent events had broadened his vision. He wanted to create not only a successful enterprise but one that stood for something meaningful. Evan and Sarah greeted him with firm handshakes and warm smiles as they gathered in his office. They had been by his side through the turmoil, supporting him not only as business partners but as friends. James, I have to say, Evan began, his expression a mix of pride and admiration. You handled everything with a kind of strength most people only talk about. The way you turned a terrible situation into something positive, it's inspiring. Sarah nodded in agreement. We're proud to be part of this company, James, and we're with you on whatever direction you want to take us. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their support. Thank you, both of you. This whole experience has changed my perspective. I want to do more than just grow our company. I want to use this platform to make a difference. Evan and Sarah exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. What do you have in mind? Sarah asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. James met her gaze, the determination clear in his eyes. I want us to launch a foundation focused on uplifting underrepresented communities, particularly those affected by racial profiling and discrimination. It won't just be about donations or public appearances. I want us to actively invest in mentorship programs, scholarships, and legal support for people who don't have the resources to fight back when they're treated unfairly. Evan's face lit up, clearly moved by the idea. A foundation that empowers people to rise above the biases they face? That's something I can get behind. Sarah's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Think about the impact that could have. You're not just talking about helping individuals, you're talking about changing the system, creating opportunities for generations. James nodded, a sense of purpose coursing through him. Exactly. I want us to stand for something bigger than profit. I want people to see this company and know it's not just about success, it's about resilience, justice, and empowerment. As they discussed the foundation's goals, the air in the room was electric with a new sense of possibility. Ideas flowed freely, each concept building on the last. James's vision was taking shape, and with each passing minute, he felt his resolve deepen. This wasn't just a business decision, it was a mission. Underscore 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 underscore. Over the next week, the foundation's launch became their top priority. The announcement made waves in the media, with reporters eager to cover James's bold new direction. The foundation was named the Livingstone Initiative, a tribute to James's dedication to creating a world where everyone had a fair chance to achieve their potential. The mission statement was clear, empowering individuals and communities to break down barriers, build opportunity, and foster equality. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in from every corner, and individuals who had endured their own experiences of prejudice reached out, sharing stories that mirrored James's. His foundation quickly became a symbol of hope, a rallying cry for those who wanted to challenge the status quo. As James navigated the influx of public attention, he realized that he was no longer just a businessman. He was a figurehead for a movement, and people looked to him for guidance, inspiration, and strength. It was a role he hadn't anticipated, but one he accepted with a quiet sense of honor. Underscore 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 underscore. One evening, after a long day of meetings, James received a call from a young man named David, a recent college graduate who had faced profiling during a job search. David's story was painfully familiar, an interview where assumptions had been made, biases that weren't spoken but deeply felt, a job he had been denied despite his qualifications. Mr. Livingstone. David's voice was tinged with hesitation but also gratitude. Your story has inspired me to keep pushing forward. I was ready to give up, but seeing you fight back, seeing the impact you're making, it's given me hope. James felt a warmth in his chest. The kind that comes from knowing you've made a difference. David, don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong, he said firmly. The journey might be tough, but if you stay true to yourself, you'll prove every doubt wrong. And remember, you're not alone in this. After they hung up, James sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the conversation. His decision to go public, to fight back, had already made a difference in one life. And he knew there were countless others who would benefit from the Foundation's work. People who had the potential to reshape their own futures. Underscore 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 underscore. As the weeks passed, the Livingstone Initiative gained momentum, attracting donors, corporate partners, and volunteers eager to contribute. James's business thrived alongside his mission, and the dual success felt like a vindication of everything he had endured. The more he gave, the more he felt he received in return, a sense of purpose, a connection to others, a legacy he was building one person at a time. One day, he found himself back at the airport, preparing for a flight. This time, there was no hesitation, no sidelong glances or questioning looks from the staff. The reforms Rebecca had secured were being implemented, and he could feel the shift, a small but meaningful step toward change. As he climbed aboard his jet, he felt an unfamiliar peace. The experience that had once made him feel powerless had become his greatest source of strength, a testament to resilience and the power of standing up for justice. As the plane lifted into the sky, James looked out at the world below, feeling a profound sense of clarity. He had transformed his success into something far greater than he had ever imagined, a movement, a mission, a promise to others that they, too, could rise. And as he soared into the open skies, he knew this was only the beginning. The journey was far from over, but with each step, each person he inspired, James felt the world inching closer to the vision he had long held in his heart, a future where everyone, regardless of background, could claim their right to fly. Months passed, and the Livingstone Initiative became a beacon of hope and change. James's foundation had rapidly grown beyond his original vision, attracting attention from leaders across industries, activists, and organizations worldwide. With each new partnership, each grant awarded, and each mentorship program launched, James saw the seeds of transformation taking root. The initiative was more than a foundation, it was a movement, a network of people determined to make real, lasting change. But as the foundation flourished, James's vision continued to evolve. He was no longer content to simply provide resources and support, he wanted to dismantle the very systems that allowed prejudice and discrimination to thrive. One evening, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, a new idea began to take shape. He called Rebecca, his trusted ally, and shared his vision. I want us to establish a legal defense arm within the initiative, he said. Something that can stand up for individuals who can't afford to fight back when they face injustice. If we're going to make a real impact, we need to go beyond awareness and actually challenge the system in court. Rebecca listened, her enthusiasm clear even over the phone. James, that's brilliant. A legal division focused on defending victims of discrimination? It could be life-changing for so many people. I want people to know they have allies, that they're not alone. James replied, for too long, people have felt powerless against systems that are supposed to protect them. It's time to give them a voice. Rebecca immediately set to work, and soon the legal defense branch of the Livingstone Initiative, named the Justice Project, was up and running. Within weeks, cases began pouring in, tenants denied housing due to prejudice, students facing discrimination, workers treated unfairly. The Justice Project took on each case with the tenacity and dedication that James himself had shown. Every win was a victory not just for the individuals involved, but for communities across the country. Underscore 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 underscore. One morning, James received an invitation to speak at a national conference on social justice and reform. Leaders from across the country would be there, eager to hear from him. As he prepared his speech, he thought back to that fateful day on the tarmac. What had once been a moment of frustration and pain had transformed into a mission that was touching lives and challenging an entire system. When he walked onto the stage, the audience fell silent. Their faces turned toward him with anticipation and admiration. James took a moment to steady himself, his gaze scanning the room filled with individuals who were as committed to change as he was. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I'm here because of an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone, an experience that forced me to confront a system that wasn't built to protect me, but to question my place within it." He paused, letting his words settle. "But that experience taught me something profound. It showed me the power of standing up, of fighting back not just for myself but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." The room was silent, his words hanging in the air. "Since then, we've built the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project. We've provided mentorship, scholarships, and legal defense to those who need it most. But this is only the beginning. We're here to change not just policies but mindsets. We're here to dismantle prejudice, piece by piece." A wave of applause swept over the crowd, filling the room with energy and hope. James felt a sense of pride and purpose, knowing that each person in the audience shared his vision for a more just world. Underscore 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 underscore. In the weeks that followed, the Justice Project took on cases that captured national attention, challenging companies, landlords, and even local governments that had ignored complaints of discrimination for years. Each victory was another step toward dismantling the deeply rooted biases that affected so many lives. One of those cases involved a young woman named Maria, who had been denied a promotion in her company despite being highly qualified. Her story resonated with James, echoing his own experience of facing silent barriers, of being judged by appearance rather than merit. When Maria's case went public, her courage sparked a wave of solidarity. People across the country began sharing their own experiences, using social media to voice frustrations that had long gone unheard. The Justice Project was there to respond, filing complaints, providing legal counsel, and pushing for reforms that went beyond individual cases to address company policies as a whole. James watched this transformation unfold, feeling a powerful sense of fulfillment. He had started this journey alone, facing down officers on an airport tarmac, and now he stood at the helm of an organization that was changing lives. His story had become a symbol, not just of resilience but of the power of community and collective action. Underscore 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 underscore. As the year drew to a close, James sat in his office late one evening, surrounded by letters, emails, and messages from people whose lives had been impacted by the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project. Each message was a testament to the movement he had started, and he knew that their work was only beginning. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from David, the young man he had spoken with months earlier, who had reached out after facing profiling during his job search. "Mr. Livingstone," the message read, "I wanted to let you know that I finally landed a job. They didn't look at me like an outsider, they saw me for my skills. And I know I couldn't have gotten here without your example. Thank you for inspiring me to believe in myself." James leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at his lips. In that moment, he felt the profound impact of his journey, a journey that had taken him from anger to advocacy, from isolation to empowerment. He knew that every challenge he had faced, every moment of doubt, had led him to this purpose. As he looked out over the city lights, James thought of the countless individuals who had been told they didn't belong, who had been questioned, doubted, or judged. And he knew that for each of them, there was now a place, a resource, a voice in the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project. With a quiet sense of fulfillment, he turned off his office light and headed home, his mind already racing with ideas for the future. The fight for justice was ongoing, but he was ready, knowing that he was no longer alone. Together, they were reshaping the world, one case, one life, one victory at a time. And as he walked out into the night, he felt the weight of his past lift, replaced by the hope of the future he was building for everyone. This was only the beginning. James could feel the impact of his work in every corner of his life. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of gratitude, requests for speaking engagements, and updates from the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project. Each day felt like a new opportunity, a fresh step toward creating the world he envisioned, a world where respect, equality, and justice weren't just ideals but realities. But James wasn't just thinking about the present, he was envisioning a legacy. Something that would continue to fight for justice long after he was gone. He realized this movement needed structure and sustainability to outlast him. A way for future generations to inherit not just his success, but his mission. One day, as he walked through the headquarters of the Livingstone Initiative, he spotted a group of young interns in a meeting room, reviewing case files. They were passionate, determined, and full of ideas on how to help the individuals reaching out for support. James felt a surge of pride, watching them work tirelessly for a cause he had once fought alone. Now, it was no longer just his fight. It was a shared purpose, fueled by the energy of people who believed in his vision as deeply as he did. Seeing their dedication solidified his next move. He would establish a formal mentorship and training program, recruiting young leaders from diverse backgrounds to join the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project. He wanted to create a pipeline of advocates, equipping them with the skills and resources needed to challenge inequality in every sphere, from law enforcement and corporate settings to schools and communities. Underscore 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 underscore. A month later, the Livingstone Fellowship was born. It was designed to provide aspiring leaders with training in social justice, law, public policy, and community activism. Fellows would not only learn from experienced professionals but also work directly on cases, gaining first-hand experience in the fight for equality and systemic reform. The fellowship drew applications from across the country, from small towns to big cities, from students, veterans, and activists. Each applicant brought their own story, their own fire for change, and James knew this fellowship would become a force in the years to come. At the launch event for the Livingstone Fellowship, James stood before a packed room of fellows, supporters, and journalists. He looked out at the crowd, feeling both humbled and inspired by the journey that had led him to this moment. When I started the Livingstone Initiative, I was fighting for my own dignity, my own respect, he began, his voice resonating through the room. But along the way, I realized that my story was just one of many. Every person here, every one of you, has a story. And now, we're here to ensure that no one ever has to face the obstacles I faced alone. He paused, letting his words sink in. The future is built by those who refuse to accept things as they are. It's built by people who dare to imagine a better way. And that's what the Livingstone Fellowship is about. We're here to make change, not just for ourselves, but for the people who come after us. The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. James felt a surge of pride as he looked into the faces of the young people before him, each one ready to take up the mantle of his work. The fellowship marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the world they were building together. Underscore 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 underscore. The impact of the Livingstone Fellowship was immediate. Fellows began working on high-profile cases, tackling issues ranging from housing discrimination and employment bias to police misconduct and education inequality. Their work was amplified by the media, drawing national attention to injustices that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. James watched the foundation grow, his heart swelling with pride each time he saw the fellows' dedication and passion. The cases they handled weren't easy, and the victories didn't come without resistance. But each success reinforced the purpose of the fellowship. Every win was another step forward, another crack in the walls of systemic discrimination. Underscore 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 underscore. One evening, as James was wrapping up a late night at the office, his assistant entered with a message. Mr. Livingstone, there's a young woman here to see you, she said. Her name is Ava Barnes. She's a recent fellowship graduate and said it's urgent. James nodded, intrigued. Send her in. Ava entered, her face a mixture of excitement and determination. She was one of the first fellows to complete the program. And she had quickly made a name for herself with her dedication and resilience. "Mr. Livingstone," she began, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I wanted to thank you personally. Without the fellowship, I don't know where I'd be. I came from a place where opportunities were scarce, where people looked at me and saw only my skin color, not my potential. But now, thanks to you, I'm fighting for people like me every day." James felt a lump in his throat as he listened. Ava's words were a powerful reminder of why he had created this movement. It was no longer just about his story, it was about giving others the chance to create their own futures, to stand tall in spaces that had once tried to shut them out. "I'm so proud of you, Ava," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what it's all about. You're carrying the torch, and I know you'll make a difference." Ava smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Mr. Livingstone. And I promise, I'll never stop fighting." As she left, James sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He had transformed a moment of pain and prejudice into a legacy of empowerment. And now that legacy was being carried forward by people like Ava. It was a profound feeling, knowing that his story would continue through the work of others, each one a beacon of hope and resilience. Underscore 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 underscore. Months passed, and the Livingstone Initiative, the Justice Project, and the Livingstone Fellowship grew to become national forces for change. James's name became synonymous with resilience, with justice, with the unyielding belief in equality. His story was taught in classrooms, studied in law programs, celebrated at award ceremonies. But for James, the real reward was in seeing the lives changed, the barriers broken, the communities empowered. Every time he read a letter, heard a thank you, or watched a young fellow take on their first case, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was his life's work, and he knew he had created something that would outlast him. As he looked out over the city one evening, watching the lights stretch into the horizon, he thought of all the people who had believed in him, who had stood by him, who had joined him in this journey. He thought of Rebecca, his loyal friend and ally, of Evan and Sarah, who had supported his vision, and of the countless individuals who had inspired him along the way. In the quiet of his office, he felt a peace he had never known. He had turned adversity into action, prejudice into purpose, and now, that purpose had a life of its own, one that would continue to grow, thrive, and fight for justice in every corner of the world. James Livingstone leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face. His work would never truly be finished, but he was leaving a legacy of change, a foundation of hope, and a world that was a little closer to the one he had always dreamed of. And that, he knew, was the greatest success of all. Years had passed since James Livingstone's life had taken an unexpected turn on a quiet airport tarmac. But the impact of that moment had rippled out far beyond anything he could have imagined. Now, he was regarded as a visionary, a leader who had turned personal adversity into a movement that inspired a generation. One crisp autumn morning, James sat at his desk in the bustling headquarters of the Livingstone Initiative. He looked out of his office window, watching the city hum with life, each person below moving with purpose. Today was significant. It was the anniversary of the initiative's founding, and they were celebrating with an event to honor the thousands of lives the organization had touched. Representatives from partner organizations, alumni of the Livingstone Fellowship, and supporters from around the world were flying in to attend. As the day began, his assistant brought him the event schedule, her smile warm with excitement. "You're going to be proud today, James," she said. "It's incredible to see how many lives you've impacted. People are already gathering downstairs." James smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. "Thank you. It's hard to believe how far we've come." Downstairs, the event hall was transformed into a gallery of stories. Walls were lined with photos and quotes from people whose lives had been changed by the initiative and the Justice Project. There were snapshots of fellows working on high-profile cases, pictures of families who had received justice, and testimonials from individuals who had regained confidence and opportunity through the Foundation's support. As James walked through the gallery, he couldn't help but be moved by each story. He paused at a photo of a young man named Malik, who had fought a wrongful arrest and won his case with the help of the Justice Project. Malik had since become a lawyer himself, dedicating his life to helping others who faced injustice. Malik happened to be in attendance, and when he spotted James, he approached with a beaming smile. "Mr. Livingstone," Malik said, extending his hand. "I owe so much of my success to you. Without the Justice Project, I wouldn't be where I am today. Thank you for believing in people like me." James shook his hand firmly, pride welling up inside him. "Malik, it's people like you who inspire me every day. You've taken the opportunities and turned them into something extraordinary." Malik nodded. His expression filled with determination. I promise to continue this fight. To give others the same chance I had. You've created something powerful. And we're all committed to carrying it forward. Their conversation was interrupted by a voice over the PA system, inviting everyone to gather in the main hall for the keynote address. As James made his way to the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward him with admiration and gratitude. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. These were the people who had stood with him, who had fought alongside him, and who now carried his mission forward. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice resonant and steady. Today, we're celebrating more than just an anniversary. We're celebrating the lives that have been changed, the barriers that have been broken, and the futures that have been reclaimed. He paused, scanning the crowd. When I first began this journey, it was born out of a moment of frustration, of injustice. But I quickly realized that my experience was one of many, that countless others faced the same biases, the same walls, the same doubts. That day on the tarmac wasn't just a turning point for me, it was a call to action. A reminder that we have the power to challenge the systems that try to keep us down. Applause rippled through the room, and James continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The Livingstone Initiative, the Justice Project, and the Livingstone Fellowship were created to give people a chance not only to survive but to thrive, to rewrite their own stories. Today, I see before me the faces of those who have not only defied the odds but have become champions of change. You are proof that resilience and courage can dismantle prejudice. That hope can rewrite history. The applause intensified, echoing through the hall. But James raised a hand, his gaze serious yet hopeful. But our work isn't finished. There are still walls to break down. Still people who face injustice every day. Let us remember that we are here not just to celebrate victories but to continue the fight. To build a future where no one is questioned for their right to belong. He ended his speech with a simple but powerful promise: we will keep pushing forward. We will keep fighting. And we will keep standing together until justice is no longer a privilege but a right for everyone. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming, filling James with a sense of fulfillment and peace. He stepped down from the stage, feeling the gratitude and unity that pulsed through the crowd like a living force. This wasn't just his journey, it belonged to everyone in that room and beyond. Underscore 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 underscore. As the event wound down, James found himself back in his office, reflecting on the incredible path his life had taken. He thought back to the moment that had started it all, the moment when he had been wrongfully questioned and detained. What had felt like a personal attack had transformed into a movement that had outgrown him, becoming a force for change that reached across the nation and beyond. Rebecca knocked softly on his door and stepped inside, her expression one of quiet pride. Quite a legacy you've built, James, she said, sitting across from him. Did you ever think it would go this far? James shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. No, I didn't. But I'm grateful every day that it did. And that I had people like you by my side. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. And we're not done yet, are we? Not by a long shot. James replied, his resolve unwavering. There's still work to do. But now, we have a foundation that will keep going, long after we're gone. They sat in comfortable silence, both of them reflecting on the countless battles, the victories, and the lives they had touched. The Livingstone Initiative, the Justice Project, and the Livingstone Fellowship had grown into symbols of hope, resilience, and justice, monuments to the idea that one person's stand could ignite a revolution. As the sun set over the city, casting warm hues across his office, James felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that his legacy was secure, that the world was a little closer to the one he had always envisioned. And he knew that the people he had inspired would continue to carry that torch, lighting the way for generations to come. In that quiet moment, he understood that the fight for justice was a long journey, a relay passed from one person to the next, each of them adding their own strength to the cause. And with a deep sense of satisfaction, he realized he had done his part. The rest would be carried forward by those who believed, just as he had, that everyone deserved the right to stand tall, to be seen, and to belong. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a new era, one that he had helped shape, one that would continue to grow. And as he looked out at the city lights below, James knew that his work, his story, and his legacy would endure, long after the last light had faded from his office, illuminating the world he had always dreamed of. James sat alone in his office, a quiet moment amid a life of constant motion. Outside his window, the city lights sparkled against the night sky, each light a reminder of the lives his work had touched. The Livingstone Initiative had grown beyond anything he had ever envisioned. The halls of his headquarters were now filled with lawyers, activists, fellows, and supporters from around the world, all bound by the common goal of breaking down barriers, creating equal opportunities, and bringing justice to those who had long been denied it. Tonight was different, though. It was the anniversary of that pivotal day at the airport, the day his life had changed forever. The experience had left scars, both visible and invisible, that would never fully fade. But they had also ignited a purpose within him that was now a force in the world. A soft knock on his office door brought him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see his assistant, Catherine, standing in the doorway, holding a framed photograph. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Livingstone," she said, offering a small smile. "But I thought you might want to see this." James motioned for her to come in, intrigued. As she handed him the frame, he saw it was a photo from that morning years ago at the airport. It had been captured by a journalist covering his story at the time, him, standing alone on the tarmac, facing the officers who had questioned him. The look on his face was one of quiet defiance, a glimpse of the determination that would later fuel his journey. Beneath it, someone had inscribed a quote from one of his speeches: "The future is built by those who refuse to accept things as they are." James ran his fingers over the glass, his expression unreadable. Catherine spoke softly, breaking the silence. "That day, you inspired so many people to stand up, to believe in themselves, to fight for what's right. Your story has changed lives, Mr. Livingstone." He gave her a small nod, feeling the weight of her words. "Thank you, Catherine. Sometimes it's hard to believe that moment led to all of this." She smiled, her gaze filled with admiration. "You turned it into something incredible, and I know everyone who works here is grateful for the chance to be part of it." As Catherine left, James remained seated, staring at the photograph. He thought about the people who had been there along the way: Rebecca, Evan, Sarah, the fellows and leaders who had become the lifeblood of the Livingstone Initiative. Each of them had carried a piece of his vision, each of them contributing their unique strength to a collective purpose that was far greater than any one person. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that week, James received an invitation to attend a ceremony honoring the Livingstone Initiative and the Justice Project for their contributions to social justice and equality. It was a prestigious award, an acknowledgement of the impact they had made on the world. As he read the letter, he felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for the people who had walked this path with him. At the ceremony, James was introduced to the stage by a surprise guest, David, the young man who had first reached out to him after his own experience of discrimination. David had since risen through the ranks of the Livingstone Initiative, eventually leading his own team within the Justice Project. His journey from seeking help to leading change was a testament to the power of the initiative's mission. David's voice carried through the hall, filled with gratitude and respect. "When I first met Mr. Livingstone, I was a young man with a dream but no path forward. He taught me that resilience isn't just about enduring, it's about using our experiences to make the world better. Today, I'm honored to introduce the man who taught me the power of fighting for justice, the founder of the Livingstone Initiative, and my personal mentor, James Livingstone." As James took the stage to a standing ovation, he felt a wave of emotion rise within him. Looking out at the crowd, he saw countless faces, some familiar, others new, all of them connected by a shared commitment to the cause he had once fought alone. He steadied himself, and then spoke with the quiet conviction that had become his signature. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady but warm. "Today is not just a celebration of what we've accomplished, but a reminder of what lies ahead. We've come a long way, but the journey is far from over. This work is not just a reaction to injustice, it is a vision of what we can create together." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the room. "For those of you who have stood with me, who have fought tirelessly for a world where justice is not a privilege but a right, I am endlessly grateful. You have shown me that our greatest strength lies in our unity, in our willingness to stand together and demand more from the world." The audience remained silent, hanging on to his every word. "I once thought that the best way to fight injustice was to succeed on my own terms, to prove that I belonged. But today, I see that our success is in the lives we change, the systems we transform, and the future we build together." A wave of applause broke over the audience as he stepped down, joining David and Rebecca in the wings. They shared a quiet moment, all three of them feeling the weight of their journey, the struggles, the victories, and the lives they had touched along the way. Underscore 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 underscore. In the weeks that followed, James spent more time at the Livingstone Fellowship, meeting with new fellows, sharing stories, and mentoring the next generation of leaders. He knew that the fight for justice was not a single battle but an ongoing commitment. A promise that had to be renewed every day. One evening, as he prepared to leave, a young fellow approached him, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Mr. Livingstone, I just wanted to say, I hope to one day make even a fraction of the difference you have." James smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You will. And when you do, remember that this work is never truly done. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Something that will carry on long after we're gone." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. As she left, James felt a sense of peace settle within him. He had planted seeds that would grow into something far greater than anything he could have imagined, a legacy of justice, resilience, and hope. As he walked out of the building, the city lights stretching out before him, he knew that his journey had come full circle. He had found his purpose not just in his own success, but in empowering others to rise, to dream, and to demand a world where everyone belonged. In the stillness of the evening, he looked up at the stars, each one a reminder of the countless lives he had touched, and he knew, with a quiet certainty, that his legacy would live on, not just in buildings and foundations, but in the hearts of every person who had felt seen, valued, and inspired by his work. This was the true measure of his success, the lasting imprint of a life dedicated to justice. And as he walked into the night, James Livingstone felt a profound peace, knowing he had given the world the greatest gift he could offer, a future shaped by the power of belief, the strength of community, and the unwavering pursuit of equality for all. Years had passed, and the Livingstone Initiative, the Justice Project, and the Livingstone Fellowship had grown into global forces. What had started as one man's stand against injustice had become a worldwide movement, each program tackling inequalities, defending rights, and lifting up the voices of those who were often unheard. James had taken a step back from the daily operations, allowing new leaders to carry on the work he had begun. His role was now one of guidance, mentoring and inspiring the next wave of advocates who were eager to lead the charge for justice. The work had become bigger than any one person, and James watched with pride as his legacy unfolded through the people who had taken up the torch. One chilly morning, James arrived at the initiative's headquarters for a special event, a tribute celebrating the initiative's 20th anniversary. The building bustled with energy, its halls filled with people who had traveled from every corner of the globe to honor the legacy of the Livingstone Initiative. Fellows, supporters, journalists, and community leaders were all gathered, their excitement palpable. Rebecca greeted him at the entrance, her eyes warm with pride. 20 years. James, can you believe it? James smiled, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. "I can't. It feels like yesterday that we were just getting started. And look at it now." They entered the hall together, where a series of photographs lined the walls, capturing moments of victory, resilience, and joy. Each image told a story, a family finding justice, a young fellow defending their first case, communities rallying together for equality. The journey was etched into every wall, a testament to the countless lives that had been changed by the initiative. As they moved through the crowd, James was approached by a young woman with a familiar look of determination. She introduced herself as Leah, a current Livingstone Fellow, and shared her story of growing up in a community that had often been overlooked. She had felt the weight of prejudice from a young age, but the Livingstone Initiative had given her the tools and confidence to stand up and advocate for herself and others. "Mr. Livingstone," she said, her voice full of gratitude, "this program has given me hope. Because of you, I can help others and give back to the place I came from. I want you to know that your work, it matters, more than you might ever realize." James felt a swell of emotion as he looked into her eyes, seeing the future reflected in her strength. "Thank you, Leah. I started this journey to prove a point, but I stayed because of people like you. You are why this initiative exists. And now, it's your turn to carry it forward." Leah's face lit up, and she nodded, a silent promise to continue the work he had begun. As she walked away, James felt the weight of the years lift, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. His legacy was safe in the hands of people like her. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that evening, James took the stage one final time, facing a crowd filled with people who had been touched by the initiative's mission. He looked out, taking in the sea of faces, faces of hope, resilience, and strength. These were the people who would shape the future. A future he had once dreamed of but never dared to believe would be possible. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today is a celebration of more than just a program or an organization. It's a celebration of resilience, of unity, of justice. It's a testament to the power of what we can achieve when we stand together. When we refuse to accept things as they are. The room fell silent. His words settling over them like a promise. 20 years ago. I never could have imagined that a single moment on a tarmac would turn into a movement. But what I learned that day, and every day since, is that justice isn't something we ask for. It's something we build. One voice. One action. One life at a time. He paused. His gaze sweeping over the crowd. The Livingstone Initiative. The Justice Project. And the Fellowship are not just legacies, they are promises. Promises that the fight for equality will continue. That every individual has a right to be heard. To be respected. And to belong. A ripple of applause filled the room. Growing louder as he continued. This movement was never about me. It was about us, all of us. Each of you has played a role in creating this legacy. And now, it is up to you to carry it forward. As the applause swelled into a standing ovation, James felt a profound sense of completion. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. But it was also the beginning of something bigger than he had ever dreamed. He stepped down from the stage, surrounded by friends, fellows, and supporters. Each one a reminder that his work had not been in vain. Underscore 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 underscore. After the ceremony, James slipped out onto the rooftop terrace, seeking a quiet moment to reflect. The city lights stretched endlessly before him, each light a life, a story, a possibility. He thought back to the person he had been on that fateful day at the airport, angry, frustrated, determined. And he knew that, despite everything, he would do it all again. Every challenge, every fight, every sleepless night had been worth it. Rebecca joined him, her presence a comforting reminder of the journey they had shared. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice soft. James looked out at the city, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It feels right. This work, this legacy, it's everything I ever wanted. And so much more." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city below, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Rebecca turned to him, her eyes filled with pride. "You've changed the world, James, and you've given so many others the chance to do the same." He nodded, a deep peace settling over him. "It was never just about me. I wanted to show people that they could take control of their own stories, that they could create change. And now they are." Rebecca smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've done that, and your story will live on in each of them." As they stood together, James felt a quiet joy, a sense of fulfillment that words couldn't capture. He had dedicated his life to this mission, and he knew it would continue long after he was gone. His story had become a tapestry, woven with the lives and dreams of those who had taken up his cause. The stars above sparkled in the night sky, each one a beacon of hope, a promise that the fight for justice would continue. James knew that his legacy was safe, that the people he had inspired would carry on, building a future defined by resilience, compassion, and equality. And as he looked out over the city he loved, he felt a quiet certainty. He had done his part, and now it was time to let others lead. His legacy, his story, would live on, an unbreakable thread woven into the fabric of a world that was finally beginning to understand the power of unity, of justice, of hope. This was the world he had fought for. And as he turned to leave, he knew that the journey would continue, because the future was in the hands of those who dared to dream, to stand, and to believe.